If you've never been publicly humiliated in a shopping mall food court on a Saturday afternoon while holding a tray of discounted teriyaki chicken, then congratulations, you've lived a better life than John. It was supposed to be a normal date. Well, normal by John's standards, which meant budgeting carefully, choosing the restaurant with the best combo deals, and praying his debit card didn't get declined at the register. He'd even worn his nicest hoodie, the one without the bleach stain. He thought he looked pretty good. His best friend, Mina, had told him he looked not terrible, which, coming from her, was practically a standing ovation. John had been dating Bradley for 4 months, and for 4 months, he'd been living in a kind of delirious fog that only a first love can produce. Bradley was gorgeous, the kind of gorgeous that made baristas spell his name right on the first try. He had sharp cheekbones, an effortlessly styled mop of dark hair, and the sort of confident stride that suggested the world was a red carpet laid out just for him. John, on the other hand, had the stride of someone perpetually late for the bus. But somehow, impossibly, Bradley had chosen him. Or so he'd thought. "Can we talk?" Bradley said, sliding into the plastic chair across from John with the kind of expression usually reserved for doctors delivering bad news. John, mid-bite of his teriyaki chicken, nodded enthusiastically. A grain of rice fell from his lip. Romantic. "Sure. What's up?" Bradley glanced around the food court. It was packed. Families with screaming toddlers, elderly couples sharing a single plate of noodles, a group of teenagers trying to take the perfect selfie with their bubble tea. A captive audience, though John didn't know that yet. "I think we should break up," Bradley said. John's chopsticks froze halfway to his mouth. A piece of chicken dangled precariously, then fell onto the tray with a soft, tragic plop. "What?" "I've been thinking about it for a while," Bradley continued, folding his hands on the table like a CEO delivering quarterly earnings. "And I can't do this anymore." "Do what? Eat teriyaki chicken? Because we can go somewhere else." "No, John. This." Bradley gestured between them. "Us." The word us hit John like a rogue shopping cart. He set his chopsticks down carefully, as though they might shatter if he moved too quickly. "Did I do something wrong?" Bradley sighed. A long, theatrical sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his designer jacket. "Look, you're a nice guy. You really are. But I need someone who's going somewhere. Someone with ambition. With drive." "I have drive," John protested weakly. "I drove here, in my car, that I own." "Your car is 14 years old, and the passenger door doesn't open from the inside. It's a security feature." Bradley pinched the bridge of his nose. "John, you're 23 years old. You work part-time at a convenience store. You live in a studio apartment the size of a parking space, and last week you asked me if I wanted to split a cup of coffee." "Split a cup of coffee. It was a large." "That's not the point." Bradley leaned back in his chair, and John could see it now, the rehearsed quality of his words, the careful distance in his eyes. This wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. "I need to be with someone who can match my lifestyle. Someone who's financially stable." The food court seemed to go quiet. Or maybe that was just the blood rushing in John's ears. "You're breaking up with me because I'm broke?" His voice came out smaller than he intended. Bradley had the decency to wince. "I'm breaking up with you because we're incompatible. You just listed my apartment size and my car's age. That's not incompatibility, that's a credit check." A woman at the next table looked up from her jajangmyeon with undisguised interest. Her husband elbowed her. She elbowed him back harder, eyes locked on the unfolding drama like it was a live K-drama. Bradley stood up, smoothing his jacket. "I'm sorry, I really am, but I've already started seeing someone else. His name is Tae-sun, and he's an investment banker. He just bought a penthouse in Gangnam." The food court was now definitely listening. A teenager in the corner had lowered his phone, mouth hanging open. Even the toddler at the nearby table had stopped screaming, as if recognizing that a greater tragedy was unfolding. John stared at Bradley, then at his tray of discounted teriyaki chicken, then back at Bradley. "So all those times you said money doesn't matter, I was being polite. And when you said you loved me for who I am, I was being very polite. The Jajangmyeon woman gasped. Her husband shook his head in solemn solidarity with John. Bradley adjusted his cuffs. I hope we can still be friends. And then he walked away, just like that, through the food court, past the bubble tea stand, and out of John's life, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of expensive cologne and the shattered remains of John's dignity. John sat there for a long moment, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the sounds of the food court slowly filtering back in. The Jajangmyeon woman reached over and placed a napkin on his tray. You deserve better, honey, she said firmly. Her husband nodded. That guy was a jerk. The teenager in the corner gave him a thumbs up. The toddler resumed screaming. John looked down at his teriyaki chicken, which had gone cold. He picked up his chopsticks, ate the last piece, and made a quiet promise to himself. One day, he thought, I'm going to be so successful that Bradley is going to choke on his penthouse. Here's the thing about rock bottom. The only direction left is up. Unless you start digging, which John considered briefly before his best friend Mina physically confiscated his blanket cocoon and dragged him into the shower. You've been moping for 3 days, she announced, standing outside the bathroom door with the authority of a drill sergeant. You smell like sadness and instant noodles. Those are the same thing, John mumbled from under the water. Get dressed. We're going out. I don't want to go out. The outside world is where Bradley exists. The outside world is also where job opportunities exist, and you're going to need one of those if you want to stop eating convenience store kimbap for every meal. She wasn't wrong. She was never wrong, which was deeply annoying. What John hadn't told anyone, not Bradley, not even Mina at first, was that during those long, quiet nights at the convenience store, between restocking shelves and politely dealing with drunk customers who wanted philosophical debates about which ramen flavor was superior, he'd been coding. Not just casual, hobby-level coding. Real, serious. I've been teaching myself since I was 15 and I'm actually kind of terrifyingly good at this coding. He'd been building an app, a platform that connected small local businesses with customers through AI-driven recommendations. Think of it as a matchmaking service, but instead of finding your soulmate, it found you the best dumpling restaurant within a 3-block radius. He called it Nearby. He'd shown it to Bradley once. Bradley had glanced at the screen, said, "That's cute," and gone back to scrolling Instagram. 2 weeks after the food court massacre, as John now referred to it in his mind, he submitted Nearby to a startup competition he'd found online. He'd almost not entered. The entry fee was 30,000 won, which was his coffee budget for the month. But Mina had looked at the app, looked at him, and said 5 words that changed his life. Stop being a coward, John. He entered. He won. The prize was modest, 5 million won, and a meeting with a venture capital firm. But the meeting turned into an investment offer, and the investment offer turned into a second round of funding, and before John fully understood what was happening, Nearby was the hottest startup in Seoul. It didn't happen overnight. The first year was brutal. John worked 18-hour days, surviving on caffeine and the raw, unprocessed fury of a man who'd been dumped over teriyaki chicken. He slept on a cot in his tiny office, showered at the gym across the street, and once accidentally wore the same shirt for 4 consecutive days until his lead developer, a woman named Hyojin, staged an intervention. You're the CEO, she said flatly. You can't smell like a gym locker. I'm a startup CEO. This is basically the dress code. But the app worked. It worked spectacularly. Small businesses loved it. Customers loved it. Tech reviewers loved it. Within 2 years, Nearby had 3 million active users and partnerships with major corporations. By year 3, John was on the cover of a business magazine. By year 4, he'd moved into a sleek apartment in Hanamdong with floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen he was still afraid to use because everything was so clean, and a closet full of clothes that didn't have bleach stains. By year 5, Nearby had gone international. John's net worth had more zeros than he was comfortable thinking about. He'd hired a financial advisor, a personal assistant named Seo Jun who communicated primarily in exasperated sighs, and, at Mina's insistence, a personal stylist. You're rich now, Mina said, watching him try on a tailored blazer with the bewildered expression of a golden retriever wearing a Halloween costume. You have to look like it. I feel like a fraud. You feel like someone who wore the same hoodie for 6 years. There's a difference. Stand up straight. He stood up straight. The stylist nodded approvingly. Very handsome. The jawline really comes through in this cut. I have a jawline? John turned to the mirror in genuine surprise. He did, as it turned out, have a jawline. He also had cheekbones, nice shoulders, and what Mina described as anime protagonist eyes that he'd been hiding behind oversized hoodies and terrible posture for his entire adult life. The glow-up was, by all objective measures, staggering. Not that John noticed. He was too busy running a company, attending board meetings, and trying to figure out why his smart fridge kept ordering milk he didn't need. You could date, you know, Mina said one evening, sitting in his absurdly large living room and eating takeout directly from the container because some things were sacred. It's been 5 years. You're successful, you're good-looking. Don't make that face, you are, and you haven't been on a single date. I've been busy. You've been avoiding it. Those are the same thing. They are absolutely not. She pointed a chopstick at him. You're scared. You're scared because the last person you loved made you feel like you weren't enough, and you've been using work as an excuse to never put yourself out there again. John opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, then opened it again, then closed it. I hate that you're always right, he said finally. I know. It's a burden I bear with grace. The email arrived on a Tuesday. John almost missed it. His inbox was a war zone. Hundreds of unread messages from investors, partners, media requests, and one persistent newsletter about artisanal cheese that he couldn't figure out how to unsubscribe from. But his assistant Seo Jun, who filtered his emails with the precision of a surgeon, flagged it with a single note. You're going to want to read this one. John clicked on it. Subject: Investment Opportunity, BK Creative Solutions. Dear Mr. John, my name is Bradley, CEO of BK Creative Solutions. I am reaching out to explore a potential investment partnership with Nearby Technologies. Our company specializes in digital marketing and brand strategy, and I believe there is significant synergy between our organizations. I would welcome the opportunity to present our business proposal at your earliest convenience. Warm regards, Bradley. John read the email 3 times. Then he leaned back in his chair, stared at the ceiling, and laughed. Not a small laugh. Not a polite chuckle. A full, body-shaking, tears-in-the-eyes laugh that made Seo Jun poke his head through the office door with genuine alarm. Are you okay? Should I call someone? Seo Jun, John wheezed, wiping his eyes. Do you believe in karma? I believe in efficient scheduling. Do you want me to respond to this? Yes. Set up a meeting. Seo Jun raised an eyebrow. He was extraordinarily good at raising a single eyebrow. It was practically his superpower. You want to take the meeting? Oh, I absolutely want to take this meeting. Seo Jun studied his boss's face. The barely contained grin, the spark in his eyes that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago, and slowly nodded. I'll put it on the calendar. Should I prepare the usual investor meeting room? John considered this. The usual meeting room was nice, big table, good lighting, a view of the Seoul skyline. But it was impersonal, professional. And while John was, above all else, a professional, there was a petty, teriyaki chicken-eating, broke college kid part of him that wanted to make an impression. Use the executive boardroom, he said. The one with the Italian marble table and the original artwork? That's the one. Seojun's other eyebrow rose to join the first. Noted. John immediately called Mina. You'll never guess who just emailed me. The artisanal cheese people? Worse. Bradley. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, I'm coming over. Don't move. Don't respond to anything. And for the love of everything holy, do not stress-eat an entire bag of shrimp chips before I get there. She arrived in 20 minutes. This was impressive considering she lived 40 minutes away, which meant she had either broken several traffic laws or teleported. Show me, she demanded, dropping her bag on his desk. He showed her. Mina read the email with the intense focus of a detective examining evidence. When she finished, she looked up at John with an expression of pure, unbridled delight. He doesn't know it's you. He doesn't know it's me. He thinks he's emailing some random CEO. His email was addressed to Mr. John. He literally typed my name and didn't make the connection. Mina clutched her chest. This is the greatest day of my life, and I include my own birthday in that ranking. Should I take the meeting? Should you, John? If you don't take this meeting, I will never forgive you. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The universe is literally delivering your ex-boyfriend to your doorstep on a silver platter. I'm not going to be petty about it. Mina stared at him. Okay. I'm going to be a little petty about it. That's my boy. John prepared for the meeting the way a general prepares for battle. Meticulously. He wore his best suit. A charcoal Tom Ford number that his stylist had practically wept over when he'd first tried it on. He got a haircut. He made sure the boardroom was immaculate, fresh flowers on the marble table, the good coffee in the machine, not the regular coffee. The imported Ethiopian blend that cost more per cup than John's old daily food budget. He also, because he was still fundamentally himself despite the expensive suit, ate half a bag of shrimp chips in his office beforehand. Some things never change. He's here, Seo Jun announced through the intercom at exactly 2 p.m. Should I send him in? Give me 2 minutes. John brushed shrimp chip crumbs off his lapel, checked his reflection in his phone, took 3 deep breaths, and pressed the intercom button. Send him in. The boardroom door opened, and there was Bradley. 5 years had been kind to him. He was still handsome, of course he was, because the universe had a sick sense of humor, but there was something different about him. A tightness around his eyes, a slight stiffness in his shoulders. The confidence was still there, but it was thinner now, like gold plating that had started to wear through. He walked into the boardroom with a leather portfolio under his arm, his eyes sweeping across the Italian marble table, the original artwork, the panoramic view of Seoul through the floor-to-ceiling windows. John watched his expression shift from professional composure to barely concealed awe. And then Bradley's gaze landed on John, and the awe turned into something else entirely. John would remember the exact sequence of expressions on Bradley's face for the rest of his life, and he would treasure each one like a precious gem. First, confusion. Second, recognition. Third, disbelief. Fourth, horror. Fifth, a desperate, full-body attempt to pretend he wasn't experiencing any of the above. "Hello, Bradley," John said pleasantly, standing and extending his hand. "It's been a while." Bradley's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He looked like a very expensive fish. "John." His voice came out approximately 2 octaves higher than normal. He cleared his throat and tried again. "John." "That's what it says on the building." John gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit down." Bradley sat, or rather, he sort of collapsed into the chair as though his legs had staged a mutiny against the rest of his body. John settled into his own chair and folded his hands on the table, mimicking, consciously, deliberately, and with great satisfaction, the exact posture Bradley had used in the food court 5 years ago. "So," John said, "you wanted to discuss an investment opportunity?" Bradley was staring at him. Not at his face, exactly, but at everything. The suit, the watch, a subtle but devastating Patek Philippe that Mina had picked out, the office, the implied weight of everything around them. The mental math happening behind Bradley's eyes was almost audible. "You're the CEO of Nearby Technologies," Bradley managed. "I am. The Nearby Technologies. Is there another one?" "The one valued at—" "Let's not get into specific numbers," John said graciously. "It's a bit gauche, don't you think? Let's talk about your proposal instead." Bradley seemed to physically shake himself, like a dog emerging from water. He opened his leather portfolio with trembling fingers and launched into his pitch. To his credit, the pitch wasn't terrible. BK Creative Solutions was a mid-sized digital marketing firm that had overextended itself and needed capital. Bradley had slides, projections, and a 5-year growth plan. It was professional and well-organized. It was also, John noted with his now considerable business acumen, deeply flawed. The revenue projections were optimistic to the point of fantasy. The market analysis ignored three major competitors. And the creative solutions they were offering were about 2 years behind current trends. But John listened politely, nodding at appropriate intervals, asking thoughtful questions, and absolutely, positively not enjoying this at all. He was enjoying this immensely. When Bradley finished, there was a moment of silence. Bradley's forehead was glistening slightly. Whether from nerves or the effort of pretending he hadn't once publicly dumped the man sitting across from him was unclear. "Thank you for the thorough presentation," John said. "I have a few concerns about the revenue model, but overall, it's an interesting concept." "Thank you," Bradley breathed. "So you'd consider. I'll have my team review the proposal and we'll be in touch." Standard corporate non-answer. Bradley had been in business long enough to recognize it, and his shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. "Right, of course. Thank you for your time." He stood, collected his portfolio, and turned toward the door. Then he stopped. "John." "Yes." Bradley turned back. The professional mask was slipping, and underneath it, John could see something raw and complicated and almost human. "You look really good," Bradley said quietly. John smiled, a real smile, not a CEO smile. "Thank you. So do you." Bradley nodded, seemed to want to say something else, decided against it, and left. The moment the door closed, John's phone buzzed. "Mina, how did it go? Did he cry? Please tell me he cried." "John, he didn't cry." "Mina, disappointing. Did he at least look like he wanted to?" "John, a little bit." "Mina, I'll take it. Dinner tonight? You're paying. You're rich." "John, I was rich yesterday too and you still made me split the bill." "Mina, that was character building. Tonight is celebration. Different rules." John's team reviewed the proposal and, as he'd expected, recommended against the investment. The numbers didn't work. The company was over-leveraged and under-innovative. It was, his head of finance said bluntly, a money pit wearing a nice suit. John drafted a polite rejection email. Professional, courteous, final. He didn't send it. He stared at it for 3 hours, cursor blinking on the send button, and tried to figure out why. It wasn't pettiness that stopped him. The satisfaction of rejecting Bradley, while momentarily sweet, didn't actually taste as good as he'd imagined. Tasted, if he was being honest, kind of hollow. It wasn't lingering feelings, either. The Bradley he'd loved at 23, or thought he'd loved, was a memory, softened and distorted by time. The man who'd walked into his boardroom was a stranger wearing a familiar face. What stopped him, he realized, was curiosity. He saved the email as a draft and went home. A week later, Bradley emailed again. Then a fourth time. Each email was politer than the last, each slightly more desperate beneath the professional veneer. By the fifth email, the veneer had worn thin enough to be transparent. "I understand if our previous acquaintance makes this uncomfortable. I assure you, my inquiry is purely professional. I wouldn't reach out if I had other options." He said he wouldn't reach out if he had other options. John read aloud to Mina over dinner. "So basically, I'm his last resort." "Fitting," Mina said, stealing a piece of his galbi. "You were also his last priority when you were dating." "That's harsh." "That's accurate. Are you going to meet with him again?" John chewed his food thoughtfully. "I'm thinking about it." "Why?" He set down his chopsticks. "Because I want to understand something. When he dumped me, he said I had no ambition, no drive, no future. And I spent 5 years proving him wrong. But now that I've proven it, I don't know what to do with it. The anger was useful, it motivated me. But now it's just sitting there. And so is he, apparently, in my inbox, repeatedly." Mina studied him with the perceptive gaze of someone who'd known him since elementary school. "You want closure. Maybe. You want to look him in the eye and hear him admit he was wrong. Maybe. And you want to do it while wearing that really expensive watch. I mean, I'm going to be wearing the watch regardless." "Set up the meeting, John." He set up the meeting. This time he chose a cafe. Not the boardroom with its Italian marble and its power dynamics. A regular cafe with regular coffee and regular chairs. Neutral ground. He arrived first and ordered an Americano. When Bradley walked in, he looked different than he had in the boardroom. Smaller, somehow. Less polished. He was wearing a nice jacket, but it was last season's cut, and his shoes, while clean, were showing wear. These were details that old John wouldn't have noticed and new John wished he hadn't. "Thanks for meeting me," Bradley said, sitting down across from him. The déjà vu was dizzying. Two men, a table, an uncomfortable conversation. But everything else was inverted. Flipped. The person with the power and the person without it had switched seats. "Your emails were very persistent," John said mildly. "I know. I'm sorry. It's just..." Bradley exhaled. "Things haven't been going well. Tell me." And Bradley did. The story came out in pieces like a puzzle being assembled from the edges inward. After leaving John, Bradley had dated Tae-sun, the investment banker, for about a year. It was everything he'd said he wanted. Expensive dinners, luxury vacations, a penthouse with a view. But Tae-sun had turned out to be controlling, jealous, and about as emotionally available as a concrete wall. "He once got angry at me for smiling at a waiter," Bradley said flatly. A waiter. After Tae-sun, there had been a string of relationships, each one chosen for the same superficial reasons, each one failing in the same fundamental ways. Meanwhile, Bradley had poured his energy into building BK Creative Solutions, which had done well initially but was now drowning in debt. "My business partner pulled out 6 months ago," Bradley said, staring into his untouched latte. "He took most of the clients with him. I've been trying to keep the company alive, but..." He trailed off. John listened without interrupting. When Bradley finished, the cafe was quiet around them, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the table. "Can I ask you something?" John said. "Of course. That day in the food court, when you broke up with me, did you actually believe the things you said? About me having no ambition?" Bradley's jaw tightened. He was quiet for a long moment. "I believed them at the time," he said slowly. "I was 23, I was shallow, and I was terrified of being poor. My parents lost everything when I was a kid. Bankruptcy, repossession, the whole thing. I grew up swearing I'd never be in that position. And when I looked at you," he faltered, "I saw someone who was comfortable with not having much. And it scared me. So you left. So I left. In the worst possible way, in the worst possible place. And I have regretted it every single day since." John absorbed this. It didn't erase the humiliation. It didn't undo the nights he'd spent staring at the ceiling of his studio apartment, wondering if Bradley was right. But it added context, and context, John had learned, changed everything. "For the record," John said, "I was never comfortable with not having much. I was just working on something you couldn't see yet." Bradley's eyes glistened. He blinked rapidly and looked away. "I know that now. And for the record," John continued, leaning back in his chair, "the teriyaki chicken was delicious, and I will not accept any slander about the food court combo meal." Bradley let out a surprised laugh, genuine, startled, the kind that snuck out before the brain could approve it. "It was a good combo meal. It was an excellent combo meal." They looked at each other across the table, and something shifted. Not dramatically, no orchestral swells, no slow-motion eye contact. Just a small, quiet rearrangement of the air between them. "I'm not going to invest in your company," John said gently. Bradley's face fell, but he nodded, as though he'd been expecting it. "I understand. Your revenue projections are fictional, your market analysis ignores half the competition, and your core service offering needs a complete overhaul." "Okay. That's very specific. But," John said, "I'd be willing to consult, unofficially, help you restructure the business plan, make introductions, maybe find you the right investors. People who are a better fit." Bradley blinked. "You'd do that? After everything?" "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because it's a viable business concept buried under terrible execution, and I'm physically incapable of watching a good idea die because of bad spreadsheets. That might be the nerdiest act of mercy I've ever witnessed." "You're welcome." The problem with spending time with someone, John discovered, is that you start to know them. Not the surface version. Not the carefully curated version that shows up to first dates and board meetings. The real version, the one that emerges during late-night strategy sessions over cold takeout, the one that argues about font choices in pitch decks with unreasonable passion, the one that falls asleep on the conference room couch with a laptop balanced on his chest. The real Bradley was not what John had expected. The real Bradley was stubborn, yes, and proud, and sometimes maddeningly vain about his hair. But he was also whip-smart, surprisingly funny, and fiercely protective of his small team of employees. They stayed when the partner left, Bradley said one evening, looking at the small office that housed his remaining staff of 7. They could have found other jobs, better jobs, but they stayed. He paused. I can't let them down. John watched a man he thought he'd known reveal himself to be someone entirely different, and it was deeply, profoundly inconvenient. You're staring, Bradley said without looking up from his laptop. I'm thinking. You're staring while thinking. It's distracting. Your fonts are distracting. Who uses papyrus in a professional deck? It conveys creativity. It conveys that you made this presentation in 2005. They argued about fonts for 45 minutes. It was, against all logic and reason, the most fun John had had in months. Mina noticed because Mina noticed everything. You're falling for him again, she said, not as a question. I am not. You reorganized his filing system. You don't even organize your own filing system. Seojun does that. His files were a disaster. It was a public health hazard. John. What? You brought him homemade kimbap. John's ears turned red. He forgets to eat when he's working. It's a professional concern. Malnourished business partners don't make good presentations. He's not your business partner. He's my consulting project. You brought your consulting project homemade kimbap with the little heart-shaped carrots you learned to cut from that YouTube tutorial. The hearts were an accident. You practiced for an hour. I was on video call. I watched you. John buried his face in his hands. This is a disaster. This is adorable. But also, yes, potentially a disaster. The restructured business plan took 3 months to complete. During that time, John and Bradley met at least twice a week, sometimes more. They worked. They argued. They laughed. They got kicked out of a cafe once for being too loud during a debate about social media algorithms. And slowly, carefully, like two people walking across a frozen lake, they started talking about things that weren't business. Bradley told John about his childhood, the bankruptcy, the shame, the desperate need to never feel that helpless again. John told Bradley about the years after the breakup, the anger that had fueled him, the loneliness that had followed success, the strange emptiness of having everything he'd ever wanted and no one to share it with. I used to drive past the food court sometimes, John admitted one night. They were sitting on the floor of Bradley's office, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, the city lights twinkling through the window, like some kind of masochistic pilgrimage. I avoided that entire district for 2 years, Bradley said. Guilt is a very effective GPS. You felt guilty? Of course I felt guilty, John. I publicly humiliated the kindest person I'd ever met because I was too scared to be poor and too stupid to recognize that I already had something valuable. He looked at John with an expression that was raw and unguarded and completely unlike the polished man who'd walked into the boardroom weeks ago. I have apologized for a lot of things in my life, but I've never meant it as much as when I say, I am so sorry. John's heart did something complicated and acrobatic and deeply inadvisable. You've already apologized. Not enough. I'll apologize every day if you want me to. That seems excessive. I've been told I'm an excessive person. They looked at each other. The city hummed outside. A paper rustled in the draft from the window. Bradley, John said slowly, are you just saying this because you're rich now? No. Bradley's voice was firm in a way that brooked no argument. John, I started falling for you again the night you corrected my font choices. Do you know how pathetic that is? I fell for a man over typography. Papyrus is objectively terrible. See? That right there. That indignant little face you make when something offends your sensibilities. I'm so. Bradley stopped himself, looking almost angry at his own emotions. I have no right to feel this way. I know that. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because of a number in a bank account. And I have no right to sit here and tell you that I've spent 5 years comparing every man I've met to you and finding them all lacking. Every man. Every. Single. One. Even Tae-sun? The investment banker with the penthouse. Especially Tae-sun. The man arranged his books by color. Not by author, not by genre, by color. That's not a library, that's a paint swatch. John laughed. He couldn't help it. The laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep and fundamental, and once it started, he couldn't stop. Bradley watched him laugh with an expression of such helpless, hopeless tenderness that it made John's chest ache. I need time, John said when the laughter subsided, to think about this, about us, about whether there even is an US. Take all the time you need. And I need you to understand that if we try this again, it can't be because of what I have. It has to be because of who I am. The same person I was in that food court. The same person who thought splitting a large coffee was a reasonable date idea. It was a reasonable date idea. You literally cited it as a reason for breaking up with me. Bradley winced. I was wrong about many things. That's near the top of the list. John stood, brushing off his pants. He looked down at Bradley, still sitting on the floor amid the wreckage of their work session, and felt the future branching out before him like a river splitting into streams. I'll call you, he said. Okay. I mean it. I'll actually call. This isn't a, I'll call you. That means, I won't call you. Okay. It might take a few days. Take a few weeks if you need to. I'll be here. Bradley paused. Not literally here. On this floor. I'll eventually stand up. But metaphorically here. John smiled and left. He lasted 4 days. 4 days, Mina said, unimpressed. I had money on at least 2 weeks. You bet on this? Seo-jun and I have a pool. He had 10 days. Hyejin had 3. She's going to be furious she was 1 day off. My employees are gambling on my love life? Your employees are invested in your love life. There's a difference. Also, the pot is up to 200,000 won. So please make your decisions in a timely manner. John called Bradley. Hi, he said. Hi, Bradley said. His voice sounded like he'd been waiting by the phone, which he probably denied doing but absolutely was doing. I've been thinking, and I've decided that I'm either very brave or very stupid. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I want to try again, but I have conditions. Name them. First, we go slow. Glacially slow. We're talking continental drift speed. Agreed. Second, complete honesty. If something bothers you, you say it. If something bothers me, I say it. No more running. Agreed. Third, we go back to that food court. A pause. The food court. The food court. You, me, and a tray of discounted teriyaki chicken. We're reclaiming that memory. Another pause, longer this time. When Bradley spoke again, his voice was thick. I think I can manage that. Good. Saturday at noon. I'll be there. And Bradley? Yes. I'm paying. Saturday. Noon. The food court. It looked exactly the same because food courts exist in a temporal vacuum where nothing ever changes. The same fluorescent lights. The same slightly sticky tables. The same overwhelming collision of smells. Fried chicken competing with tteokbokki competing with the inexplicable cinnamon pretzel stand that never seemed to have any customers yet remained perpetually open. John arrived first because he was pathologically early for everything, a trait that had served him well in business and terribly in dating. He ordered 2 teriyaki chicken combo meals, sat down at a table near the center, and waited. Bradley appeared at 12:02, which was close enough to on time that John decided not to hold it against him. He was wearing a simple white shirt and jeans, no designer labels, no statement pieces. He looked, John thought, like the version of himself he should have been all along. You got the combo meal, Bradley observed, sitting down. Both of them. I'm not going halves this time. Big spender. I try. They looked at each other across the plastic table, surrounded by the chaos and noise of a weekend food court, and something settled between them. Not fireworks, not lightning, something quieter and more durable, the feeling of a key sliding into a lock and turning. I practiced what I wanted to say, Bradley started, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. John's eyes widened. You wrote notes. You once made me redo an entire pitch deck because my bullet points weren't parallel in structure. I wasn't about to wing the most important conversation of my life. Fair. Bradley unfolded the paper, cleared his throat, and looked at John with an expression of nervous determination that was so sincere it was almost painful. 5 years ago, in this exact food court, I did the cruelest thing I've ever done. I looked at the person who made me laugh harder than anyone, who listened to me when I was boring, who once walked 40 minutes in the rain to bring me soup when I was sick, and I told that person he wasn't enough. John's throat tightened. He hadn't thought about the soup thing in years. I was wrong, Bradley continued, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. Not because you became successful. Not because of nearby or your apartment or your watch, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure costs more than my car. It costs more than 3 of your car. Not helpful, John. Sorry. Continue. I was wrong because enough was never about money. It was about character. And you had more character in your bleach-stained hoodie than I had in every designer outfit I ever wore. He folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. I don't deserve a second chance. I know that, but I'm asking for one anyway, because apparently I have no shame and terrible self-preservation instincts. The Jajangmyeon woman was back. John spotted her 2 tables over, same spot, same husband, same undisguised interest. She was watching them with the intensity of someone who'd been emotionally invested in the storyline for half a decade. She met John's eyes and nodded firmly, as if to say, "Give him a chance, honey." Her husband gave a thumbs up. John laughed. A laugh that was half joy, half disbelief, and entirely too loud for a food court. He picked up his chopsticks, grabbed a piece of teriyaki chicken, and held it out across the table. "Eat," he said. Bradley blinked. "What?" "The food's getting cold. Eat first. Feelings later." "But I just delivered a whole. And it was beautiful. Very well structured. Excellent parallel bullet points. Now eat your chicken." Bradley stared at him for a moment. Then his face broke into a grin, wide, genuine, and devastating in a way that no amount of wealth or success could ever compete with. He picked up his chopsticks. They ate. Epilogue. 1 year later. The tech industry party was the kind of event that John would have been intimidated by 5 years ago. Chandeliers, champagne, people who said synergy without irony. Now it was just a Tuesday. He stood by the bar, nursing a glass of sparkling water. He'd never developed a taste for champagne. It tasted like someone had carbonated a headache, and watched the crowd. "You're doing the thing again," said a voice beside him. John turned. Bradley stood there in a navy suit that fit him beautifully. Not the most expensive suit in the room, but worn with a quiet confidence that money couldn't buy. His hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit that John had come to find inexplicably endearing. "What thing?" "The thing where you stand in the corner of a party and observe everyone like a nature documentary narrator. I was thinking about how that man's toupee is listing to the left." Bradley looked, squinted. "Oh my God. It really is. Do you think he knows? Someone should tell him." "Not it. Not it." They grinned at each other, and John felt the warmth of it spread through his chest like sunlight. 1 year. 12 months of slow, careful, sometimes clumsy rebuilding. They'd fought, of course they'd fought. About money, old wounds die hard. About work-life balance, John's was non-existent. Bradley's was only slightly better. About whether pineapple belonged on pizza, a disagreement so fundamental it had nearly ended the relationship for a second time. But they'd also laughed, and talked, and sat in comfortable silence, and done all the small, unglamorous things that real love is actually made of. Grocery shopping, assembling furniture, arguing about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom, falling asleep on the couch during movies neither of them had picked. BK Creative Solutions, with John's guidance and a new business plan that used exactly zero papyrus font, had secured proper investment and was slowly climbing back to stability. Bradley had cried when the deal closed. Quietly, in his office, where he thought no one could see. John had seen. He'd pretended not to, because sometimes love meant knowing when to look away. "By the way," Bradley said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I got you something. You didn't have to. It's our 1-year anniversary. I absolutely had to." He pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it over. John opened it carefully. Inside was a gift card to the food court teriyaki chicken place. "It's loaded with enough for approximately 300 combo meals," Bradley said. "So we're set for a while." John stared at the gift card, then at Bradley, and felt his eyes prickle in a way that was entirely inappropriate for a tech industry party. "You're an idiot," he said, his voice unsteady. "You're idiot," Bradley corrected. "That's not the selling point you think it is. And yet here you are." John kissed him, right there, by the bar, in front of the chandeliers and the champagne and the man with the listing toupee. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic or perfectly lit. It was clumsy and slightly off-center and tasted like sparkling water. And it was the best kiss of John's life. When they pulled apart, Bradley was smiling. Not his professional smile. Not his confident smile. The real one. The one that was slightly crooked and made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Let's go home," Bradley said. "It's barely 9 o'clock. "Exactly. We can be in pajamas by 9:15. You say the most romantic things." They left the party together, walking side by side through the lobby, past the valets and the town cars, into the cool night air. "Hey, John." "Yeah. Thanks for the second chance." John reached over and took his hand. "Thanks for being worth one." Behind them, through the party windows, the toupee man's hairpiece finally completed its journey and fell gently into someone's champagne glass. Neither of them saw it. They were too busy walking home. The end.